Hello everybody and welcome to another fabulous day in the wireless class. Today we're going to cover chapters 5 and 6. Alright, so we talk about WPANs and WMANs and WWANs, all kinds of weird stuff. But basically it's just a wireless PAN, and PAN is personal area network. So we're talking about very short range. Bluetooth, Zigbee, which is kind of, you'll typically see those in some medical facilities, things like that. Like in the U.S. Army has like a PAN outfit, like for the American soldier, where it has like a GPS and a radio, and some other stuff like a rangefinder built in the helmet, stuff like that. But again, it's very short range. So a WPAN is a wireless personal area network, and that is governed under 802.15. All right. Then there's wireless LAN. We all know what wireless LANs are. That's the stuff that we work on in class. Then there's a wireless MAN, metropolitan area network, and again, it's just when a city installs wireless. And then we have a WWAN, and this is wireless for mobile phones. So make sure you're good with all those. All right, some things about wireless communication. The communication that happens, obviously, all communication typically happens in two directions. I say something to you, and then you verify that you received it. So like when I call you on the phone and you say hello, I know that you're there. And then when I say something, you respond back, or you say, hey, say it again, something like that. So it's always two ways. So multiple wireless devices use the same channel. So if three of us are all obviously working on the same access point, we're all hitting the same channel, the same radio. Interference from simultaneous transmissions. If there are three of us all communicating on the same channel, there's a greater chance of interference. But again, that's assuming we're all communicating at the same time. So that's another reason that wireless kind of does like the take turn kind of thing. You only talk when it's your turn, because if we were all sending at exactly the same time, there would be a lot more interference. All right, wireless is always half duplex. The radio can either send or receive. It can't do both. So only one station can talk at a time. And this is another reason that the N protocol and then afterward, any protocol after that, is so much better than A, B, or G, because it has what they call MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. There are multiple antennas and multiple radios, so we can do multiple communication at a time with multiple clients. But typically, your wireless is always half duplex, and only one station can talk to the wireless access point at one time. All right, wireless is separated into service sets. And a service set, like each wireless access point then transmits, in a certain area. So this area is like the usable wireless signal. Once I go outside this area, I may actually still see the signal. I may be picking it up, but I probably can't use it. It's probably too weak. So this is the wireless area, and we typically call this the cell. So, and this is the smallest of the service sets. So when we have one access point, we have a basic service set, a BSS. And again, the area covered by the BSS is called the cell. Membership in a BSS is called an association. So if a laptop or some wireless client wants to talk to the AP, first he has to authenticate himself so that the AP knows he's there. Then he creates an association. So it's really a four-step process. I authenticate, you say, okay, and I understand that you're there, and then I try to associate with you. So it's like the third step where we actually send the WEP key or the WPA key or whatever it is. And then he confirms our association, and then we're in. All right, moving on. So multiple SIDs. A commercial grade access point allows the use of multiple SSIDs, service set identifiers, or multiple networks on the same AP. The cheap ones that you buy, like the Linksys or whatever, you can only have one SSID. But most of all the Cisco stuff any commercial grade typically allows you to have more than one SSID. And we use those for, like we might have one for a private wireless network and one for a public wireless network. And that way, like patients in a doctor's office in the waiting room can all browse the wireless, and then the doctors can browse the wireless, and it's two separate wireless communication or two separate wireless networks. All right, anytime you have multiple SIDs, you need to have VLANs. Each SID needs to have its own VLAN and be a part of its own network. So because of this, in order to have that, your access point has to connect to a switch, and the connection has to be through a trunk. So a trunk link is required from the access point in order to do multiple SIDs, because obviously you've got to carry traffic from multiple VLANs. All right, an ESS, when one access point is not enough to cover an area. So let's say you got like a doctor's office and you have this doctor's area, and obviously it's too big for just one access point. You got to have 2 access points. So the SIDs are both going to be the same on both access points. And when I pass from one AP to the next, it's called roaming. So if I roam between the access points, the SIDs are going to be the same, so I don't have to reassociate or like join the network, that kind of thing. But I will associate with a new access point when his signal is stronger. So it looks like this. I got 2 access points. Here's my laptop. As I'm walking between here, once the signal here gets weaker and the signal on this side gets stronger, I will then associate with this access point and then send all my communication here. Now, in order for this to work smoothly, both access points need to be on different non-overlapping channels, 1, 6, and 11. Because if this guy was on channel 1 and this is on channel 1, I can't differentiate between the two because they're both on channel 1. But if he's on 1 and he's on 6, I can differentiate the two, and I can understand when channel 1 gets weak and channel 6 gets strong. And then I need to associate with channel 6. But the SSID here would be the same, my network or my network. So that's proper roaming. Both access points need to be on the same SSID, but each access point needs to be on a separate non-overlapping channel. Then each access point connects to a switch or a layer 3 switch with an access port. And in this case, this one would just be an access port, this would be an access port, because they're both just dealing with VLAN 10. Now, if these access points were dealing with multiple SSIDs, then this would need to be trunk links. Alright, if I don't have any access point at all, when 2 wireless devices connect to each other without using an access point, it's called an IBSS, an Independent Basic Service Set. And they sometimes call that an ad hoc network or an ad hoc wireless. So when that happens, one device becomes the leader and kind of advertises the network to the other one. If you ever saw old printers that had like an IR port in the front, it's like a little piece of red glass, little kind of window thing on the very front of the printer. Old laptops used to have an IR port too, and you used to be able to print directly from the laptop to the printer as long as you line those 2 windows up, and you could print wirelessly. But it was terribly slow and nasty, so we don't do that anymore. Alright, so a repeater. A repeater strengthens the wireless signal and pushes it out further. And you can use a regular access point, or you can buy a specific repeater device. So repeaters are out there to just push the signal out farther. So in this case, like let's say my wireless router is down here in my basement on the left side of my house, and I want to be able to access devices outside my house on the right side. I could put a repeater on the right side of my house, and that would push the help to strengthen the signal and get it back out to my backyard. Alright, so you can buy hardware repeaters. So here's one from Newegg. It's 20 bucks. You just plug it into a wall outlet, and that'll strengthen your signal. Or you can do one through software. So basically, I can take an old Linksys, the little blue access points, and I can wipe the BIOS, and I can put a new operating system on there, DDWRT. There's also another one called Tomato. And if you put DDWRT on there, obviously one of the modes you can actually pick is repeater. So you can actually turn one of those itself into a repeater just using the software. So that's kind of cool. All right, then your chapter goes into wireless bridges. So when you need to connect offices or devices that don't have wireless, we can use a bridge. So this is it says weatherproof access point, but this would be a bridge between the 2 houses. Now you can still buy these. Like this is a wireless network adapter. So if my laptop for some reason or my PC doesn't have wireless, I can go USB and get a special cable and plug into this, and then this would be my wireless antenna. This would bridge the difference. Alright, then it's also talked about mesh networks. So obviously in a mesh wireless, each wireless access point can connect to multiple other access points. And that way you don't have a single point of failure. Typically when you see metropolitan area networks, whether they're cabled or wireless, they're set up in like a semi-mesh. Obviously every point doesn't connect to every other point, but they connect to enough that if one point dies, it doesn't kill the network. Alright, then your book goes on to talk about the actual frame for wireless and how different it is. A wireless frame actually has 4 different addresses in there. And they kind of show you what those addresses are for in your book. So depending on who the sender is and who the receiver is, or what the target is of the frame, that dictates like what goes in the address. So your book also talks about that here. So any frame from the DS to the station, or from the client to the station via an AP would be, this is how it would be. All right, so you remember from back in from Intro to Networking, we talked about CSMACD, Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Detection. So on wired networks, we listen on the line. If it's clear, we send. And then as we send, if there's a collision, our stuff comes back, waits a random amount of time, and then starts the whole process again. Well, wireless is half duplex, so I can't detect a collision because I can only send or receive. I can't do both. So it uses carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. So wireless avoids collisions. And how does it do this? With time slots. Everybody's allowed to talk for a small amount of time. And the clients kind of negotiate this together depending on what your access point supports, things like that. So it's kind of a timeshare. Hey, you can talk for 10 milliseconds and I'll talk for 10 milliseconds. So as long as the wireless clients are in close proximity to each other and they can communicate with each other and negotiate the time slots, that all works fine. So it kind of works like this. I start, I get the packet ready to transmit, I hear the wireless signal, I'm like, okay. And then again, based on the length, I have to determine whether I can send this packet, in my time slot. Do I have enough time left? If it'll fit, then I send it. If it won't fit, then does the receiver support extended time slots? Well, no. Well, then I'll queue the packet to send it later. That kind of stuff. So that's another reason why wireless is so slow compared to obviously wired communication. One, it's half duplex. Oops, sorry about that. Get interrupted. So anyway, another reason why it's so slow, because it has to share time slots. So we have half duplex. I can only send or receive at the same time. So I have to do those things separately, which takes more time. And then I also have to wait for other stations to talk until it's my turn. So with carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance, each time a frame is sent, an acknowledgement must be returned to ensure the frame was received. So now I also have to wait for the acknowledgement for each frame. All right, and as if that's not bad enough, there's also a required interframe space period. So between each frames, I've got to have a certain amount of space, or dead time. And your book goes in and talks about the 4 different types, and I will not quiz you on the 4 different types, but obviously they're listed here. So it looks like this. I'll send a frame, and then there's that space where nobody can send. And then depending on who is next in line, then he sends a frame, then there's a space. And then he sends a frame, then there's a space. And then whoever's next, this guy sent a frame. So I can only send or receive at the same time. I can only send when it's my turn. And each time I send, there has to be a space between my frames. So all that kind of adds up to why wireless is relatively slow, and why you only get the 54 megabits per second or whatever your speed is when it's your turn, and you don't necessarily get 54 megabits per second. Your signal would support 54 megabits per second, but obviously you've got to take other considerations in there, the space between frames, things like that. Plus, the more people that are sharing your wireless access point, the slower it gets. If you're in a classroom and you've got your laptop and it's wireless, and you're like, man, this wireless sucks, look around. I bet there'd be 3 or 4 other laptops all sharing that access point. And there's typically one access point between every 2 classrooms. So then you got to wonder how many people in the other classroom are using wireless, how many of the phones that people sat down with are also using wireless. And even when you're not on the phone call itself, your phone is still trying to do different things. It's getting time updates, it's doing weather checks, if you've got some kind of weather program. So there are packets that go from phones, and the phones have to establish too with the access point. So all that contributes to crappy wireless. All right, so beacons. When you enable the SID to be broadcast, your access point sends a beacon out 10 times per second. And this is why your wireless device, when you check it and say, show available wireless networks, it shows you all the available wireless networks. Because it checks for all the beacons that it hears, and it pulls the SIDs out of there and says, okay, hey, here's the SID beacons that I know of. So that's called passive scanning. Your device actually is not scanning the access points. He's actually listening for beacons from access points. All right, so probing is a little bit different. When the SID is not being broadcast, I have to put in the specific SID I'm looking for in my device, and then my device will send out probes for that SID and say, hey, if you are, belong to this SID, please respond. So you would need to know the name of the SID that you're trying to talk to. So probing is active scanning. So the first step for securing your wireless network would be to not broadcast the SID. You know, you can go home and take your Roku and your laptop and your phone, and you can actually just type in the SID, and then your device will find that SID for you. And that way, when your neighbor searches for available wireless networks, he won't see your network. All right, there's also a request to send and a clear to send. So when wireless clients are not close enough to hear each other and work out the values needed to use time slots, RTS and CTS is used to reserve time slots. So basically, whenever my laptop wants to send, let's say I'm on the far left side of the access point and you're on the far right side of the access point. We can't communicate together, but I can communicate with the access point. So what I'll do is I'll send a request to send to the access point, and then he'll send me a clear to send, and then I'll send, you know, whatever. When he says my clear to send, he'll say you're clear to send for, you know, 50 milliseconds, and then I'll send as many frames as I can in that allot of time. And then when I want to send again, I send a request to send, then I wait until he sends me a clear to send, and then he'll tell me how long I've got on my clear to send. So RTS, CTS, request to send, clear to send. All right, and then your book talks about data rates. So each wireless radio has steps or tiers, depending on how you want to describe it, for their speed. So as you walk away, let's use G protocol. So I start out at 54 megabits. As I start walking away, it doesn't dip down to 53, 52, 51. It actually, once I can't establish the 54, it drops down to 48 megabits per second. And then once I get too far away for 48 megabits per second, it drops down to 36. And then from 36 to 24. So you can see, other than the first drop, which is only a few megabits, you know, then I start dropping, you know, 12 megabits and then another 12 megabits, that kind of stuff. So distance from the access point, especially for G, will greatly affect your speed. This is why sometimes people complain about the Roku boxes and have issues with the Roku, because the Roku is typically the farthest device away from the access point, which means it gets the slowest speed. All right, your book also talks about the stuff that kind of goes through when a client, you know, makes the request. So again, the first thing I do as a client when I see an access point that I want to connect to is I send him an authorization request. Hey, you know, I want to join your wireless network. And then he says, okay, hey, I know you're here. Go ahead and send me your security credentials or your stuff. So then I start the association. So the association request, the third step, is actually where I would send the WEP key or the WPA key or stuff like that. And then he responds back with the association response, whether I'm allowed or not. And that's pretty much it. All right, so again, for roaming, both access points need to be on the same SID, but they both want to be on separate channels, separate non-overlapping channels. And that's typically where people that don't understand wireless make their mistake. They'll put one on channel 1 and one on channel 2, or they'll have two different SIDs, and then I have to totally reassociate with everything. If I'm here and I've associated with this access point and sent him my security credentials, and this one's on the same SSID, when I go over to here, I just have to associate with the access point, not the network. So I don't have to resend, you know, the WEP key or the WPA key or whatever it is. I don't have to go through all that security stuff anymore. You know, I just kind of like, it's a smooth transition. All right, and then I think later on there's a chapter that really gets into roaming more, but if not, you've got a basic understanding. You understand that both access points need to be on the same SID, both access points need to be on a separate non-overlapping channel, and those access points, if they're only using one SSID, they can connect with an access link to the switch. But if they're using multiple SSIDs, like a public and a private, you need to have a trunk link between the access point and the switch to allow for both of those VLANs to connect. All right, and that's it, folks. Have a good one, and make sure you bring any questions to class.